Welcome back, MSS Math 9 students. Welcome to the Flipped Classroom series. This is 8.1 Flipped Notes. The teachers who have designed this are Mr. Gill and Mr. McKimmon. Let's begin. Okay, lesson 1, solving equations. If you turn to page 292 and read about Steve Nash, you will find that it tells you that one year Steve scored 407 points in 20 playoff games. If the equation 20x equals 407 represents this situation, what does x represent? Well, x represents the number of points per game. And this will represent an average number. Okay, so what operation could we use to determine the value of x? So we have 20x equals 407. Remember that the 20 is connected to the x by multiplication. So we're going to use the inverse operation, and that would be division. So if we divide, if we divide both sides by 20, we see that 20 divided by 20 is 1, so we're left with x on one side. And that's the whole idea here, is we want to isolate the variable so that the variable is all by itself on one side. And if we divide 407 by 20, we get 20.35. And as I said earlier, that's an average of the points per game. Okay, let's try a few. 7x equals 42. Again, that's 7 times x. So we will divide to get rid of that 7. And x equals 6. In B, we can divide both sides by -3. And any number divided by itself cancels out, and we're left with 1. So x equals -12. Now remember here, we're dividing a positive by a negative, and if there are an odd number of negatives, then the answer will be negative. That works as well as in your multiplication. Okay, x divided by 4. So if we multiply both sides by 4, then that cancels, the 4 and the 4 cancel, and we're left with x equals, and -9 times 4, there's only one negative, so the answer is going to be negative. So that's -36. D, we can divide both sides by -6, divide by -6, and k equals, excuse me, equals a negative divided by a negative. There's an even number of negatives, so the answer must be positive, and it's +12. Okay, the next one. It's -n over 5. Now, this one I'm going to rewrite. This can be seen, that negative can be applied to the bottom. So if we multiply by -5 and multiply by 5 on the other, -5 on the other side, then n equals -45. 1/3 z. Now, 1/3 times z, that's z over 1, that gives me z over 3. Now, I'm going to use that z over 3 equals -9. Now I'm at a spot where I can, excuse me, where I can manipulate the equation. So I'm going to multiply by 3, and z equals -27. Okay, next question. 1/2 f, and I'm going to rewrite that as f over 2 equals 3. So that's f divided by 2. The inverse operation would be multiplication. So if we multiply by 2, the 2's cancel on this side, and we get f equals 6. Excuse me. Okay, and I'm going to rewrite this as s over negative 3 equals negative 6. And it's s divided by negative 3. So we're going to multiply to get rid of that. Multiply by negative 3, multiply by negative 3. The negative 3 cancels on this side, leaving me with s. And negative 6 times negative 3 is positive 18. Next one. Okay, it's 2.5 times x. So we're going to divide to get rid of that. So 2.5 and divide by 2.5 on the other side. So the left side we're left with x because 2.5 divided by itself is 1. And x equals 4. All right. Here's a little food for thought. All right, let's look at some of the examples. So solving one-step equations with fractions, 2x equals 3/4. So we have this value that's 2x. And when we have two x's, that means that that amount is 3/4. So here in the diagram, we can see there's 3/4. But if we want to find out what 1x is, we have to split 3/4 in half. Well, if we do that, then we would end up with 1.5/4. And we don't want to have a fraction with a decimal in it. So here's what we do. We take 3/4 and we're going to make an equivalent fraction out of it. So how do we do that? Well, we can multiply it both the numerator and the denominator by 2, and that gives us 6/8. So here we are down here in the second number line, and we're left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6/8. And now we can easily split that in half because the first half here and the second half here. And we see that both of the sections are equal. So we have 3/8 here and 3/8 here. So 1x would be equal to 3/8. Now, this is the method that I prefer. If we want to solve it algebraically, and this is the direction that we're moving, we have 2 times x equals 3/4. Well, the inverse operation of multiplication is to divide. So we divide by the numerical coefficient. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then we divide the 3/4 by 2. So we have x, and I'm just going to rewrite this, is 3/4 divided by 2, and 2 as a fraction is 2 over 1, because any number divided by 1 is itself. So I can rewrite that 2 as a fraction. Now that's going to help me because I'm going to change this to 3/4, and remember from last year in your fractions unit, we can change a division statement to a multiplication statement. And we do that by multiplying by the reciprocal. And the reciprocal just means to flip the second fraction upside down. So the denominator now becomes a numerator, which is a 1, and the excuse me, the numerator becomes the denominator, which is the 2. We multiply straight across, so 3 times 1 is 3, 4 times 2 is 8. And we end up with the same answer. Okay, why learn algebra? Yes, finding x is only useful if you're a pirate. All right, next. So we have this value that this value m, when I divide that into 3 equal groups, it gives me -2/5. So whatever it was that I started with, when I divided that amount by 3, so into 3 equal groups, I ended up with -2/5. Well, how's that going to help us? Well, if we know that if it's divided by 3, and we come up with -2/5, and so that's -2/5 right here, what would we do to find out what m is? Well, if each of the groups is -2/5, and we're going to have 3 groups, then we can take all 3 of those groups, and what does that give us? Well, that has, here's -2/5 plus -2/5 plus -2/5 gives us, now remember when we're adding and subtracting fractions, the denominators must be the same, which they are, but our answer also has the same denominator. So -2 plus -2 plus -2 is -6, or -1 1/5. All right, let's take a crack at this, solving it algebraically. Well, we have m divided by 3, so the inverse operation is multiplication, so times 3. We multiply this by 3, well, that's 3 over 1. So I end up with m equals, because the 3's cancel, m equals -6 over 5, which is -1 1/5. Just a little sidebar, remember back from excuse me, our grade 8 days, if I have an improper fraction where the numerator is larger than the denominator, okay, I can change that into a mixed number by pulling out the whole numbers from it. So I have 4/4 plus 3/4 will give me 7/4. But remember that 4/4 is a whole, so that's 1 3/4. Okay, so when we are dealing with mixed numbers, excuse me, in our equation, first step we're going to do is we're going to change those into improper fractions. So this is negative, and remember 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5 halves, k, equals, and this is 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1, so we have negative. There you go. You got an announcement, after school announcement, into the video. Woo woo. Okay, so 3 times 2 is 6 plus 1 is 7 halves. All right, so I know this is looking a little tricky here. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually take this, and I'm just going to slide this whole, whoa, and I'm going to put it down here. -5 halves k equals -7 halves. And we are going to divide both sides by -5 halves. Divide this side by -5 halves. All right, so any number divided by itself is 1. So these 5 halves on this side cancel out, and I'm left with k equals -7 halves divided by -5 halves. Now there are 2 ways that we can solve this. I'm going to show you the first one, and that's a situation we learned about last year in grade 8. If the denominators are the same, all we have to do is divide the numerators, which is -7 divided by -5, which is 7 over 5, because any negative divided by a negative yields a positive. Okay, so we have a 7/5, and we can change that into 1 2/5. All right, the other way that we can solve that is if we take, excuse me, if we take -7 halves divided by -5 halves, we can start with our -7 halves, we can change it to a multiplication statement, And then we can multiply by the reciprocal, which is negative 2 over 5. Now we cancel the 2 and the 2. Sorry, I'm just going to leave that negative there. And we end up with negative 7 over negative 5. Okay, which turns out to 7/5, which equals 1 2/5. All right, now it's time to show you know, and I'm just going to pause the video and you can see if you can solve these. Okay, let's have a look now and see if you got the right answers. The first one, A, is negative 2/9. B worked out to be 1 4/6. Remember, we need to reduce that to lowest terms, which is 1 2/3. And C, remember here we had negative 7 divided by negative 5, which yields a positive quotient, which is 1 2/5. All right, next questions. Now we're going to add some decimals. Don't be too afraid. It's not that much more difficult than the whole numbers. How do we solve it? Well, we look, and now the numerical coefficient is a decimal. It's negative 1.2. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to divide by negative 1.2. Okay, and that's going to happen to both sides. So 3.96 divided by negative 1.2, sorry, negative 3.96 divided by negative 1.2 is going to give us an x equals 3.3. Remember that a negative divided by a negative gives us a positive answer. Okay, next one. We have r divided by 0.28. The inverse operation is multiplication, so times 0.28 times 0.28, and that cancels out on the left, so we're left with r equals, and negative 4.5 times 0.28 equals negative 1.26. And the reason it's negative, we have a negative times a positive, so there's an odd number of negative signs, so we end up with a negative product. All right, again, it's your turn. Let's see if you can show that you know. I'm just going to pause the video now and let you have a try at this one. Welcome back. Excuse me. The first one, A, it's n divided by 1.3, so the inverse operation is multiplication. So we multiply both the left and the right side by 1.3. That cancels out, leaving us with n equals 1.04. Question B is 5.5k. So that's 5.5 times k. Again, inverse operation. The inverse operation to multiplication is division. So we're going to divide by 5.5 to isolate k. We divide by 5.5 on both sides, and we end up with k equals negative 0.62. All right, let's get into a word problem here, and I'm just going to make sure that this page is locked. And it is. Okay, great. All right, so the formula for speed is s equals d divided by t, where s is the speed, d is the distance, and t is the time. Remember, we always start with the formula. So s equals d divided by t. And now we're going to plug in the values that we know. So it tells us the length of the Canadian football field, including the end zones, is 137.2 meters. Well, that's going to go where the distance is. So that's 137.2. Okay. If a horse gallops at excuse me. If a horse gallops at a speed of 13.4 meters per second, so that will go into our speed, so 13.4. How much time would it take? Well, that's the unknown. We're trying to find t. So we need to isolate it. Now this is a little bit tricky because now the time, the t, is in the denominator position, and we actually want to have it up top in a numerator position. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to go through a series of 2 steps. First, we're going to multiply both sides by t. Multiply this side by t. What that does is on the right side, it cancels out the t, and on the left, we're left with 13.4t equals 137.2. I'm just going to move that part up here. Okay, so now we're back to our one-step algebraic equations. So we have 13.4t, well that's times t, so we're going to divide to get rid of that 13.4. And to maintain the equality, we're going to divide the other side by 13.4. And we end up with t equals 10.2 seconds. Remember that it asks us to round to the nearest tenth of a second. Next question. And it's time for you to show you know. So I'd like you to pause the video and take a crack at this one. All right, welcome back. So again, we start with the formula, speed equals distance divided by time. Again, we end up with that unknown time, so we have to get time back up to the numerator position. So we have a multiplication of t on both sides. What happens then is we're able to eliminate the t from the right side, and we end up with 23.5t on the left-hand side. We then divide both sides by 23.5, and t equals 2.1 hours. Again, notice that it says the nearest tenth of an hour. All right, the last example. Winter Warehouse has a winter jackets on sale at 25% off the regular price. Now, we're going back to grade 8, and remember that 25% off means 75% pay. Okay, so we're going to we're going to let R equal the regular price. So our algebraic equation, we're going to change 75%, changes to a decimal, which is 0.75. So we're going to use that 0.75. 0.75 times the regular price, which was R, yields us a sale price of $176.25. So that's $176.25. Well, now we know that 0.75 is connected to R by multiplication. So to eliminate the 0.75, we use the inverse operation, which is divide by 0.75. We must do that to both sides. And that cancels out the 0.75 on the left, so we're left with R. And on the right, we find out that R equals $235. All right, that concludes lesson 8.1. Please turn in your textbook to page 301 to 303, and the questions that are assigned are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17, 18, 19, 21, 26A, and 27B. Notice that the last 2 are a little bit tough, so those are a bit of challenge questions. Good luck, and if you have any problems with the homework, please feel free to come and see Mr. Gill or myself, and we will see you next class.